Hello and welcome to the agenda on Labour Social. I'm here with Phil Moorhouse in the corner. Hi Phil, how you doing?
Hello.
Hello,
A
hello.
lot better than Rishi Sunak.
Oh well, it's been an interesting week, hasn't it? And breaking news, I guess this morning, Boris Johnson said that he's handed everything over. He's handed it all over,
but
Phil.
he's lying. Well, he hasn't even said that. People are reading, like skipping important words. He said nothing. He said that he's handing all the information over from May 2021, which is after the period the inquiry is interested in. And he says he might check for some earlier records later, which basically means he's going to try and curate his older records to see if there's anything that incriminates Sunak, but not him. So he's basically gaslighting. There's lots of people reporting, oh, Boris Johnson's dropped the bomb here. He's handed over all of his stuff. No, he hasn't. Oh, he says he's going to hand over all his stuff. No, he hasn't. He says he'll hand over some of it, maybe.
And he said he's going to deem whether it's worthy of them seeing it as well, which really annoys me. I mean, if you are a victim of a sexual assault, you have to hand over your phone to the police, and you don't get to choose what messages you show them or not. That's if you're a victim of a crime.
Yeah.
Boris Johnson is accused of a crime, essentially, because we know he's been up to his eyeballs in
he's been
corruption.
Investigated at any rate.
Yeah, he's the one being investigated. And he's like, no, I'll decide what's relevant. I'll decide what's relevant or not. Oh, my God.
Doing exactly what Sunak's trying to do, to decide on behalf of the inquiry what they should see.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a bit cheeky, isn't it? Do you think they'll get away with it?
No. I mean, I'm not a legal expert, but legal experts are looking at it. And I mean, I don't think any of them are saying he's got no chance, because you never know. But and I know someone pointed out that the head of the King's Bench is actually the twin sister of Richard Sharp, but I'm pretty sure they're not going to put her in charge of the case, because that would look ridiculous.
Oh my God.
Oh, they're everywhere.
Oh, it's so corrupt.
It's the old school type.
It is the private school mafia. Everything.
But the judiciary do tend to be quite fiercely independent. So I imagine it will all be above board in terms of who's in charge of the case. And then presumably the government will get to appeal it when they lose, and it goes to the Supreme Court. But it should happen quite quickly.
Yeah.
Because it's like the prorogation of Parliament. That all happened quite quickly because it was urgent. So the courts will move quickly to expedite a case when it's massively in the public interest and it's urgent.
The thing is, though, am I right in thinking that none of this is going to come out until the actual report is published in 2026?
No, because it's a public inquiry. So there will be evidence given in public from this summer.
Oh, right.
So we'll find some, in terms of the actual report and the conclusions, everything. Yeah, we're not going to see that till well after the general election, but there will be stuff comes out because there's going to be public witnesses. There's witnesses giving statements in public, and they're going to be asked about things.
Right. So this is going to be like a drip, drip, drip over the next 18 months until the next election, isn't it? This is going to be like a seeping wound on the side of the Tory party.
It'll be 18 months. I would consider that.
Trojan in the chat there is saying the general election seems so far away.
I think it's a year away.
Now, did you happen to see the article in The Guardian by the economics editor of The Guardian, who was saying that there's no difference between the Tories and Labour?
I did see that, and I thought to myself, how ridiculous can you be?
Well,
he specifically, for
he's
example,
a Brexiteer, mate. He supported Brexit, and he's part of the old Thai elite.
I mean, if you just take environmental policies, like night and day, Labour have already said they're actually trying to make out, oh, it's quite funny you announced this policy a few days after having taken a receipt of a donation from someone who donates to Don't Stop Oil. It's like, no, Labour announced this policy at least in January. I think much earlier, but even the Daily Mail reported on it in January. It wasn't just this last week. They've just started going on about it again. But, the policy of no new excavations in the North Sea, but it goes beyond that. If you look down, at the investment that Labour are planning to deal with the climate change, but there's one thing in Labour's climate change policies which is unlike anything the Conservatives would do. They're going to introduce like an environmental filter to all of their policies. So in other words, every single policy that is adopted by the Labour government has to meet an environmental test. It has to meet a test to make sure that it doesn't further harm the environment and actually preferably improves things.
Yeah.
Every single policy has to do that. Whereas the Conservatives, they have a similar policy, only every single one of their policies has to pass through a Brexit filter. Does it meet the Brexit purity test?
The Brexit purity test.
But anyone that's actually looking at... Now, sometimes I understand, like, lay people looking at rhetoric can go, well, is there really much difference here? It's like, well, no, because rhetoric is aimed at your target voters and they're the same people. But when you look at policies, anyone who tries to claim that there is anything other than a chasm between Labour and the Conservatives I challenge people to name a single policy where they're even remotely alike, has not read the policies or is lying.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this guy was trying to make out that the Brexit policies were the same, the economic policies, the environmental policies, basically, there's no difference between them. And this is a weird thing that the people who are purportedly on the left, generally people who come from wealth and are on the left, love to come out with this. They're all the same. They're all the same. And it's like a gift to the Tories. And do you think that he's his opinion, right? His opinion piece here on the Guardian website. It's by a guy called Larry Elliott. He looks proper miserable in his profile pic. The Brexit, the environment, energy bills. It's hard to tell Labour and Tory policies apart.
Even though Labour advocated a policy of applying proper windfall taxes to oil and gas companies to keep energy bills down, the Conservatives didn't. The Conservatives put energy prices up. They capped them, but they put them up. So I like, on no policy can I actually really think that there's any similarity between Labour and the Conservatives. Like, I cannot think of a single one.
Yeah. Although I've got to say, you know, I do get a bit, especially as a sort of old hat at the old, you know, fighting against Brexit. It does get my back up when we hear lines from the Labour Party saying we're going to make Brexit work. And I'm just sitting there going, it can't. It's like saying you're going to make
they also can't
work.
Not say it.
Like, make the war on drugs work.
So what would they say different?
They could say they will. If I was in Labour's position at the moment, if anyone brought up Brexit, I would go on and on about how bad it's been for the country. I would have a dig at the Tories every opportunity to say they have absolutely mucked it up. Try not to alienate people who did vote for Brexit, although I'm happy to do that on a personal capacity. But if I was talking on behalf of the Labour Party, I'd say, you know, it maybe if it had been done differently, it could have worked. But
well, they are saying that.
The reality is that we need to have a look at not just the deal with Brexit that we had. Sorry, spoken about renegotiating the Brexit deal, essentially tinkering around the edges, but which is fine. But it's the point where they say we won't rejoin the single market, we won't rejoin the customs union. I wouldn't say that. I would just say, I just leave it vague. I'd say, look, we'll do what is in the British people's interests, and we'll do what the British people tell us to do.
Yeah, but that doesn't work, because then, and they have been, when they were being vague, they were asked for specifics, and they could get away with it to begin with, but now they can't because they've got to firm up their offer. If Labour try and be vague and not say what they would do, then two things will happen. First of all, the decent journalists asking them will say, so you haven't got a plan at all then, or you're being evasive about what your plan really is. But the right wings will just fill the void. They will just say what Labour's plan is. They do it anyway, even when Labour sort of say the opposite. The thing is, Labour cannot join the single market. It's not within their power. The EU will say no. Because unless we've got the Conservatives on board with it, whatever we do in that regard can just be disrupted by the Conservatives coming straight back to power. So they don't have these options. They have to wait until it's politically settled, as it's called, which means that the key voters have to.
But why say never? Why say we will never rejoin the single market? Why not just
because.
What difference would it make if they said, obviously that's something not something we can look at the moment, and that's it.
Then you've been vague. Yeah, any evasiveness like that. If you
explaining it like you've explained it and saying we have to wait until that is a politically settled matter.
No, because then the right wing will say it's there. They're already right. You've got to consider. Labour is being incredibly explicit that they're not going to rejoin the EU. They're not going to join the single market. They're not going to join the customs union. But the right-wing commentariat are still saying that Labour are going to do that. How much more credible would it be if Labour were leaving room for doubt about what they're actually doing? If Labour
my point.
Are not...
the right-wing commentariat will accuse them of wanting to rejoin the EU, but no matter what they do.
Yes, they can accuse, but will people believe it?
Well, if
they know Labour is saying something else, it comes down to who do you trust?
Well, the people who voted for Brexit believe in magical thinking. I mean, I don't see any point in kind of. I feel like it's a huge sacrifice for Labour to make to alienate the Remainers, and don't forget,
but then they're not
50% of the population. You're talking millions and millions of people who might be activists for Labour. If Labour are a little bit more positive about the future relationship with the EU.
No, what we're doing is we're over amplifying the number of people that will actually deliberately vote to make a Tory government more likely out of spite for Brexit. Polling shows that yes, there's an increasing number of people think Brexit, even never mind is a mistake, even should be reversed. But it also shows hardly anyone is going to use Brexit to determine their general election vote. And the ones who do are more likely to be leavers, particularly in those target voters groups. Because look at it this way. So you imagine this pool.
I absolutely agree on all this, Phil. My point isn't that they should be saying, like, we should rejoin the EU tomorrow. I agree they shouldn't be saying that. As much as it hurts, as much as it pains me to say this. But I don't understand why they say never. I mean, Boris Johnson never said never about anything.
They have to have a plan. They have to have a plan, and that plan has to be long-term. They can change the plan, but they have to have it. And the plan is either you stay out the EU or you go back into the EU. They have to commit to one of those things, because any vagueness at all, any evasiveness makes it look like either they don't know what they're doing or they're up to something that they don't want to be honest with the public about. So ironically, in order to present themselves as more trustworthy, they actually have to be less trustworthy. It's just how the political game
works. What a great game. What a wonderful world in which we live. Just a big shout out to Alec Barrett, who's just put a £2 super chat in. By the way, super chat is on if you definitely want us to read your comment, because obviously we're going to be back and forth here, and there are a lot of comments coming in. Thank you. But Alex says, Phil is applying consequentialism. I don't even know what is consequentialism.
When you do a thing, what is the next step? What is the consequence of it? So you just have to keep thinking. Labour have to be very, very positive. They have to say they've got this basic plan for the next generation, and it's all worked out in minuscule detail. They have to give that impression. They can change the plan. We know they can change the plan because Labour, Starmer has changed some of his policies over the last couple of years. So we know he can change it.
Hey, I remember, I'm old enough to remember the 97 election when Tony Blair was asked about tuition fees. And he said, no, we won't bring in tuition fees. It wasn't in the manifesto. And then they brought in tuition fees. And then in 2001, they said, don't put the tuition fees up. He said, no, we're not thinking about putting up tuition fees.
When did tuition fees come in?
97. Well, 98, actually. I think the bill went through in 97.
Oh.
98.
Oh, yeah, no, you must be right. Because I remember I didn't pay them.
I didn't pay them.
I think my sister did.
I went into university in 97. My partner's the same age as me, and she went into university a year later. But because she'd taken a year out in industry, she was allowed to continue not paying the fees. But I mean, they specifically said they weren't going to do it, and then they did it anyway. So do you think this might be a case of the same?
No, that'd be naughty. I don't think it does you any good. See, you can change your policies. What you mustn't do is change your manifesto promises.
Yeah, but it's never
mentioned in the manifesto. Compelling reason to do so.
Yeah, there's always. Could you just blame it on COVID? Just blame it on.
Yeah, but
blame it on Russia invading
unless there's
Ukraine.
unless there's No, I don't, and I don't want anything like calamitous to happen to give him an excuse.
Okay,
I
well,
would much rather
how
he just.
about how about for the excuse? We went to the local library and we got ourselves an atlas, and it allowed us to see the positions of all these countries around the world. And it turns out,
I
geographically speaking, that Brexit is a really stupid idea.
I don't think the Dominic Raab defense will work for them. They're trying
We
to
didn't
present themselves as
realize.
competent. But there's absolutely no problem with their position because they've got to do several things before we could rejoin anyway, even if they could explicitly say that's their intended direction of travel.
Mm.
You know, we've got to repair trust with the EU. At the moment, we're behaving very badly. Look at what Rishi Sunak's done this week alone. He's gone to a meeting. He says he's gone to a meeting of European leaders. No, he has gone as a second tier member to, this is Macron's idea, isn't it? So the EU would meet with other like countries who aren't part of the EU to try and bring everyone on board. And he asked that no EU flags be there, so he could pretend it's got nothing to do with the EU.
Really?
And he said, "Oh, and I've
Oh
put."
my God.
He says, "I put tackling like asylum at the top of the agenda." And I said, "I don't think so, mate. This was a meeting to discuss Ukraine. You know, the country that's being invaded, not your pissing poll rating." So he's gone there and he's behaved incredibly badly, and he has caused a stink amongst European leaders.
We're
And all
very good
right,
at that, Phil. We are world leaders
but
in causing an international stink
this has
with
to be
Russia.
repaired because you know, although the heads of government are politicians too, and they know he's only doing it for public consumption back home, and although they will know that when the government changes, it's a different government and they're going to be more pro-European.
Mm.
Their publics won't. Their public will just see it as the UK government has changed, and they will want to see if it is actually any better or if it's just as arrogant as the last one. So there's a lot of repair work to be done. They've got to, come what may. The EU is going to be focused on the renegotiation of various aspects of the TCA, which happens in 2025 and 2026. So fishermen are going to come back into the equation. And, you know, that has to be dealt with first. The EU aren't interested in anything else. So there's a lot of things that have to happen, including, as I say, adding millions of pro-EU voters to the electorate. But then what I would say is I would look for some softening of the position, ideally for the second manifesto, for the following election. Because in 4 years, you can only get so much done anyway.
I know, but I'm really worried in those 4 years because the Tories are just burning the place out on the way out, aren't they? It's like an insurance jobby on an old pub. They're just they're destroying the place, and then Labour are going to be handed this shit sandwich, and it's going to be like, well, here you go. We're almost guaranteed a recession in the next few years in this country, and these pissy little trade deals that we've got with Australia and New Zealand, they're not going to pick up the slack on the amount of trade that we've lost to Australia.
No,
leaving
but
the
there
EU.
is scope. All Starmer has to do is show ordinary people that life's getting better. And you look at it with the current economic model, you'd think, well, we haven't got much scope here. But I mean, bear in mind, so I don't watch Question Time, but there was a famous clip on Question Time from Chris Patton, who gave a 2-minute bit of attacking Brexit, and everyone's sharing it around. But he got one thing wrong in it, and the pro-Brexiteers are straight onto it. But it was still a good point. He talked about how GDP per capita is lower than in this country and that country, and even Lithuania.
Yeah.
Now, he was wrong. It's not. What I think he meant was median income, because the median income in Lithuania is currently higher than it is in the UK.
Yeah.
And that is really because GDP per capita, if you were to do a ratio
it might be
of
PPP
median
though,
income
isn't it?
to GDP.
It might be because there's two ways of measuring GDP, isn't there? There's power purchasing parity. So sometimes they look at
either
that
way. You should be really clear about what you mean. But I would say if he depicts median income, if you do like median income as a ratio of GDP per capita, it's really low in the UK.
Yes,
because we're very, very poor at distributing wealth. So people do not really get the benefits, particularly under Conservative governments, of our economic might,
there were
our productivity.
Two things yesterday. First of all, on the Lewis Goodall show on LBC, they were talking about inheritance tax, and you had some very posh rich people. He had someone from the Institute of Economic Affairs, 55
course he
Hudson
did.
Street, on there saying, I think that inheritance tax is a terrible idea. I mean, I don't have to pay inheritance tax on my daddy's old Spitfire. And it's just like, it was painful. And the other thing was the news that came out that Amazon have now just gone a second year in a row paying no corporation tax in the UK whatsoever.
Yeah, well, we've had oil companies pay negative tax. We've actually paid them.
Yes,
to take care
out
of
of
tax
taxpayers' money, given money to the companies that are poisoning the planet and destroying the future. Oh, I mean, sorry, Kevon Sims has just dropped in a $20 super chat there. If the roles were reversed and Labour was the Brexit party, do you think the Tories would be saying make Brexit work, or would they be bashing the Brexit failure over Labour's head every day? Nobody likes a weak politician.
It would be different because the Tories are really always split over Europe and the EU. I mean, this is why Labour, like I keep saying, for Labour to complete a U-turn, all it needs is for target voters either to change or, for the target voters to suddenly want more pro-EU policies. That's it. There's no internal resistance in Labour. Like I'm on like Labour groups and things like that. And and they were full of Lexiteers a few years ago, and yes, there were more people saying "shut the fuck up," but they were full of Lexiteers. Now they're nowhere to be seen, to be seen at all. Even the tankies have gone underground. So it's a completely different attitude. There's no internal resistance in Labour at all to Labour. As soon as it becomes politically expedient to change that Brexit position, they will change it in a second. The Conservatives have a much more difficult process because amongst their membership and amongst a number of their MPs, they will want to preserve Brexit. So they're going to have a civil war over it.
Oh, I hope so.
Well, I don't. I would rather they just, because it's going to delay the time it can take before we can, because until the Conservatives get on board with returning, we cannot return. The EU will just say, we're not going to start this process, which was a ball ache the first time round, just to have another Conservatives come back in power, only to wreck the whole thing. And it's all right, Labour go, don't worry, they're not going to come back to power. Have you seen them? They're as mad as a box of snakes. But they'll just say, well, we don't know that. They could come back to power. Your population is as mad as a box of snakes. It voted for Brexit in the first place.
It did indeed.
So there's no way out of it until the Tories have sorted themselves out. So I would rather they just did it quickly, but I just don't expect them to. I expect them to fight. They're going to have to do what Labour did in the 80s to recover from Michael Foot and Militant. They're going to have to go through that process.
To you mean Labour?
No, I mean the Conservatives.
The Tories
are going to have to detoxify themselves.
But do you think that's possible, or do you think that
they're going to have to?
But if we brought in PR in the next Parliament, then they'll split in two, wouldn't they?
Yes, that would help. That would help.
Would you like to see that happen?
Bring it in yes, but they're not going to. They may bring it in again. I can see a strategic benefit in bringing it in for the second manifesto.
Yeah.
Whether they will, I don't know. But I can see strategic benefit in doing it for the second manifesto.
We just got a super chat in from Alec Barrett, who says, Graham, consequentialism is the doctrine that the morality of an action is to be judged solely by its consequences. If anyone watched the TV show Andor, which was brilliant, by the way, there's a lot of consequentialism in that, if that's what it means. Did you watch Andor? Have you seen that film?
No, I don't watch telly. I hate telly.
Just download it. Download it.
But I hate it. I hate anything that's passive.
Including passive aggression.
Oh no, I don't mind that. But I absolutely hate just sitting there watching a screen with something on it. Can't do it. I used to be able to, but I can't now. I just hate it.
I find that whenever I watch something now, I'm always thinking how they could have made it better, or what I would have done if I was the director. And I'm always impressed when I see a movie or a TV show and I get to the end of it and go, wouldn't change any of that. If that was handed to me and said, Graham, we need you to make this better, I'll be like, I don't know, couldn't do it. But there are so many shows and so many films where I just get to the end and I'm like, why did they do it? Why did they do that? And I'll annoy the hell out of my partner, Cat, because it's
Well,
just like,
I
here's
know
what they
mine
should have
'cause
done.
mine likes watching Netflix, some shit on Netflix. I have to stick my headphones on and do something else on my laptop. But every now and then, I'll just be stuck watching it for a few minutes, and I'll just ask questions. Why did they do that? She'll go, "Oh, because of this." So why didn't they do this instead? I don't know. Go away.
We got another super chat come in from One Angry Pagan. Thank you very much. Rightful rage against aggravating wrongful reapers is inspirational to the downtrodden, desperate pleading public. Is that from V for Vendetta? Rightful rage against aggravating wrongful reapers. It's really quite hard to say. But thank you very much for that super chat there, One Angry Pagan. One of the things that I was going to mention as well is this trade deal with Australia, Phil,
Yeah.
and Boris Johnson dropping the
Yeah.
ball again.
None of this is news.
Dropping a bollock.
It's one of those things that it's been made news now, and I'll probably talk about it just because it's come out again. But everyone knew it at the time. I said at the time, Boris Johnson wanted his trade deals for the front page of the Daily Express. He didn't actually want better trade because Boris Johnson is not quite so much of a fool as some may think he is. He knew that Brexit. He knew that leaving the single market would be no good. Boris Johnson argued against leaving the single market right up until the point it thought it might make him prime minister.
Yeah.
You know, you can find clips of him from years before talking about how ridiculous it would be to leave the single market.
Yeah.
But
I thought that the story just showed just how flippant and unserious he is as a politician. Oh, thanks to Kev on there with another €10 super chat there. Sorry, $10 super chat. We have a saying here in the States: the liberal left willfully follow polls, the conservative right willfully changes them. And it seems that's true in the UK as well.
Well, in the US, I don't know exactly how it is with the media. I know it's quite polarized, but in this country, it's not really that polarized. The media is basically controlled by 3 Tories.
Yeah.
So
yeah, but yeah, with the Boris Johnson. So what happened was he was having dinner with the then Prime Minister of Australia, Scott Morrison, in number 10. This is in the spring of 2021, and they were discussing this trade deal. And because Boris Johnson's not a details man, he doesn't like doing detail. He decided that it would be okay for them to measure the quotas, not in the weight of the actual animal itself, but just in the weight of the cuts of the animal, which meant that the actual quota was about to increase absolutely exponentially for the Australian farmers to bring over their hormone-injected beef over to the UK and make just a massive profit, wipe out British beef farming, you know, the sort of standard beef farming, just leave the kind of very, very expensive, almost, is it Kobe beef, the really expensive stuff from Japan?
Like Wagyu and stuff like that.
Yeah,
isn't there?
there'll be like one cut that's amazing that, you know, you'll pay £150 for. But everything else is just going to be Australian hormone injected crap.
Yeah.
And
well,
it's destroyed a whole section of farming in the UK. And I bet they've done the same thing with lamb as well, with New Zealand.
They have with New Zealand. I mean, basically, you knew this was happening at the time because the way it was being reported in both Australia and New Zealand, the correspondents, when they were reporting it, were literally laughing. They were laughing at the camera. They were saying, I can't actually explain to you why the UK has agreed to this. It's ridiculous.
Yeah. And then the Japan trade deal was worse than the deal that we had when we were in the EU. I think we got a deal with Singapore as well, which is worse than the deal that we had when we were in the EU.
Yeah.
The Canada trade deal is worse.
We'll be able to compare the Australia, because the EU are negotiating with Australia, but they're doing it properly. We'll be able to compare that when that comes online.
But we sent copies of the Beano over to Australia, mate.
Yeah,
so,
I know.
Right.
It's like I was hoping against hope that was just a joke, but it's not. It's
we
true.
Actually did that. That happened in reality. But yeah, I'm just saying about Boris Johnson though, it just shows his lack of attention to detail. So he's having this meal. They notice that he doesn't really understand a significant issue in the deal, and he goes, "Oh yeah, no, I'll agree to that." And they went off to the toilet, rewrote the deal, got him to sign it before the end of the meal, and he said, "Oh, I wanted to apologize. I did it to apologize for the fact that we joined the EU 50 years ago in the first place and abandoned Australia." And it was just like, so you've screwed over every single British farmer because you want to apologize to someone else's country about something. I mean, would we ever do that about slavery? Would we,
And
Phil?
it's also, well, he would, but but in it's not just screwing over farmers. I mean, it is, because it's like, he first of all told farmers, right, you're going to have a harder time selling to Europe now. All right, so you'll just have to sell more to the British population.
Yeah.
Oh, by the way, that's not going to happen because we're going to get a load of injected hormone beef. But also, what we're talking about is lower standard stuff. We're now talking about importing and eating food that
Yeah.
the EU would not allow you to put in dog food,
Oh my God.
basically.
Really?
Well, the EU wouldn't allow hormone injected beef to be put in dog food, would it? Doesn't allow
No,
it at
that's a good
all.
point. Shit, I never thought of it like that. Oh my God.
So,
That is that. I keep saying that's insane, but yeah, apparently Liz Truss kicked off about it, about the fact that Boris Johnson had gone along with this. But what
yeah,
the Aussies said was, you've got to keep to this deal that you've made over
yeah.
literally a
Otherwise, we'll
bottle
walk
of
away.
wine. No, it wasn't that. It was they will go to the media, we'll go to the press and say that you're backing out the trade deal,
Well,
and
yeah,
that would have been so
and walk away.
catastrophically, embarrassing to Boris Johnson that he went, "Oh no, we better keep it."
But yeah, because
Government
they'd
for embarrassment.
but they did do that. They did it again later on as well with the environmental standards. So we actually had this agreement, which was crap. And then we were about to close it. And then the Australians said, actually, we're not really sure about these environmental standards. The Boris says, oh, I promised the environmental standards. Oh, that's a shame. We're just going to have to cancel it all that. No, I want my Daily Express headlines. All right.
Yeah,
We will lower the environmental standards just for
yeah,
you.
yeah.
So
Little
it's
bit special.
it's and that's what it was all about. He promised these quick trade deals. Oh, we're going to get these trade deals really quickly, and they're going to be marvelous. And people can't tell what a marvelous trade deal is, but they can tell what a quick trade deal is. So they needed to be
Yeah,
able to have the Daily Express and the Daily Mail trumpeting the latest trade deal, because if he'd have he couldn't have carried on 2 years down the line without any trade deals. He'd look a right tit.
but this is the thing that we talked about this when we were doing like the Three Blokes in the Pub. Like we interviewed people who did
Mm,
trade deals, and he said it takes
yeah,
years. People at the
yeah, of course
WTO,
it
it
does.
takes years because there's a bit of give and take, and you get
Yeah,
quibbling over little things and big
yeah.
things, and it takes about 7 years on average to do a decent
Mm.
trade deal that keeps both sides fairly happy. We
Plus,
just we
plus
just
about 3
turned
years of
around and dropped
implementation.
our pants and bent over and said, "Do what you
Yeah.
like," because we were so desperate to
Well,
try and replace the trade that we lost with the EU. And it's
that's because both sides start off with a position that is nowhere near what the other side wants. And what you're supposed to do is incrementally concede something in return for something
yeah,
else.
yeah,
And it's a slow, laborious process. But
yeah,
what they did is that, well, we want this deal really quickly. So the other side just said, well, the quicker you move to our position, the better.
yeah.
And they did.
Yep, and that happened with Japan, it happened with Singapore,
Yeah.
happened with Australia, happened with New Zealand, happened with Canada, and basically now, and another point that I keep making is that when it comes to international trade deals, ones that are worth a pan of scouse, they are slim pickings. There's only
Yeah.
maybe 10 max in the world, and we have it's like having two monkey paws. Do you know what I mean? To like make wishes on, and we've squandered 9 of them already. Our government's gone,
Yeah.
all right, and there are no more trade deals after this that we really need, that would actually help our trade at all,
No.
except for maybe arguably the USA. And we're never
They will.
getting a
No
trade deal
chance.
with the US
That's in
unless
our
that's in our
interest.
favor. Yeah. Why would they?
No.
We're a tenth of their economy. Why would they give
Yeah.
any concessions to us?
No.
Especially when they see how desperate we are. And it's
Well,
like,
that's it.
we'll
That's
just
why I
screw over
can't
all the
understand
farmers.
why Biden was. I can understand why he was saying, I want to get the economy into better shape before we start negotiating with serious countries. But
Yeah.
I thought America would have gone straight in to agree a trade with us, because that stuff that Trump wrote, well, not him personally, but on behalf of Trump, was just entirely in the US's favor. It would have forced
Yes.
our public services to buy American.
Yeah. Yeah.
It would have
It
forced
was
our
it was
pharmaceuticals
insane.
industry to buy American.
But why do you think the farmers are taking this? Do you think that there are a lot of farmers who voted for Brexit? I'm not saying all farmers voted for Brexit, obviously they
Not,
didn't, but there were a lot of vote leave signs in the
I,
fields around.
yeah, I
Yeah,
think. I think they're just stuck. They are a lot of them. Don't want to. Well, they are. No, let's be honest. They are conservatives. When I've driven through rural areas, like for example, if I ever drive to York, um, anywhere near election time, the fields are full of vote conservative or like low. They go to town with it. Farmers are Tories. There will be some who are not. The farmers are basically Tories, and they're a little bit stuck. It's almost like if you imagine someone on the left who has like a really bad Labour leadership, and it's like, well, and they're going to screw you over, but it's like, but what am I going to do about it? Because it's Labour and the Conservatives. I can't really bring myself to vote for the Conservatives. And it's the same thing, I think, with
I
these
wouldn't put a
farmers.
vote Labour sign in me field. Do you know what I mean? I wouldn't put a vote Labour sign in me field if they were actively screwing me over, bankrupting me,
but
to put me family out on the streets.
Well, no. In terms of in 2019, I think it was just because they thought that fundamentally, despite what the government was saying, they would put their interests first because rural areas are so important to the Conservatives. I think they just genuinely couldn't understand that the Conservatives would actually screw over rural areas, because it'd be like killing the golden goose that lays the eggs, isn't it?
Well, yeah, and that's exactly what
I
think the Tories have banked on the fact that these people who will vote for a pig in a blue rosette, that they can do anything to them. And do you know what? In a way, though, I feel a little bit like this, being a Remainer and supporting Labour like I do. I feel a little bit like, well, you're taking my vote for granted, and this is when go back to what I was saying about the language used about our future relations with the EU. I wish what they were saying was a bit more vague. They can be definite on what they're going to do in the next 5 years, but then after that, don't say you're never going to do something.
I don't think they're taking the vote for granted in the same way, because if you look at, for example, what they will do with public services, or what they will do with taxation, or what they will do with dealing with the climate emergency, there's lots of policies in there that you will say, I can get on board with that. Whereas I would argue, if you're a farmer, you tell me something you're happy about, that what the Conservative government are doing, you probably won't be able to say anything without being ignorant of what their policies actually are.
Yeah.
So I don't
everything to do with the countryside, the environment, the shit in the rivers, the trade that we have. I mean, this whole thing about flooding our market with cheap cuts of lamb and beef. I mean,
it's probably 12 months old when it gets here.
Yeah, and been frozen, obviously, and brought across on a boat, which takes 6 weeks. But like,
we're not getting any free maggots with it. Yeah, certainly.
But I look at this and I think, well, hang on, we had New Zealand lamb anyway, because obviously you have lambing season, so you can't just have it all year round in the northern hemisphere, and that made sense. But when we were given a concession about that with the EU, because we had this former relationships with New Zealand and with Australia and other countries, so we were for a long time the bridge between the Commonwealth and the EU. Now you've got two countries, Cyprus and Malta, that are still in the Commonwealth and still in the EU, so they're like the bridge now. Which was our old position.
Well, this is what that American, was he like, he used to be a member of the American government. I can't remember what position he was now, but he was basically saying, Britain's going to realize what a monumental economic disaster Brexit was. And it is largely because what the UK represented was that bridge with the EU in terms of inward investment from America and from Asia in particular.
Yeah.
And it's gone now.
Yeah.
Germany and France are now gaining inward investment.
Yeah. And we're going to be stuck outside the big trading blocks of the world for, I mean, it's going to be another decade before we start having a more sensible trading position in the world, and we're going to be fighting for scraps until then. And I can't see any other way. When they say make Brexit work, I just sort of go, well, it can't. It just can't. There's no way on the planet that you can make more money by not being a member, not being a senior member of the biggest trade.
But the problem is that even those who accept that Brexit's going badly, and that is now most people, so many of them did so much damage to their relationships.
Yeah.
And to their own, their ego cannot take saying, sorry, I completely poisoned our family because I fell for a lie. People can't really bring themselves to do that, or at least not yet. So there needs to be more time pass. And so what they do is they latch onto the Nigel Farage idea of, Brexit's actually wonderful. It's just that it's not being applied competently. So now there needs to have a competent government have a crack at it. And as long as Labour are basically delivering better public services, better jobs, better standard of living, it will be impossible for the Tories to credibly, they'll try it anyway, but impossible for them to credibly argue they're incompetent. So then where does Nigel Farage go? It says, oh, they don't really believe in Brexit. See, so they're betraying. So the Tories are incompetent and Labour are betraying it. At which point, most voters, the pragmatic voters, will go, well, Nigel Farage isn't going to run the government, so it doesn't matter whether we think his ideas are good or not. He's not going to run the government. So we're stuck between Labour and the Conservatives, and if neither of them can make it work, then we need another way, don't we? We need a third way, and the third way is rejoining the EU.
Yeah,
I just don't know how long that takes.
People. We've got William Hawkins saying we are going to be out in the wilderness for about 20 years. I don't think it'll take that long, because I was equating it this morning to prohibition in the States. I think prohibition was around for 12 years in the States until everyone was just like, this is ridiculous. And it was the same
that could be solved internally, though.
That pushed that the same type of people that pushed for prohibition, i.e. idiots, gangsters, and Puritans.
But that was an internal issue to deal with. They could deal with that unilaterally. We've got
but you're right.
When we get to the point where we want to rejoin, that the application is just the first step.
Yes, that's true. Hang on, we just want to shout out to Alec Barrett there for a £5 super chat. Thank you very much. Farmers are slowly waking up to the fact that they are kicking themselves in their redacted by voting Tory. I hope they are. I really do hope they are. But yeah, I see the EU having the opinion. If I was the EU and Britain in 10 years' time said, "Hey, we mucked up. Can we rejoin?"
Yeah.
I think one of the stipulations has to be you have to have a referendum. You have to have 66% to say that they want to rejoin. And then that has to be the situation for at least 50 years until you can have another referendum.
They obviously can't do that, the second bit. They could insist. Actually, I don't know whether they could or they couldn't. Because at the end of the day, there is a formal process for applying. They could change it.
Yeah. I think they will, because
change it.
It's not like we're a min out in all this. We are a big country with a lot of money, and it's not worth their while to have a competitor on their doorstep trying to get undercut their trade deals and a backdoor for blag bootleg shite from China to come into their single market.
Tim's just asking there, what about Australian beef important to the EU? There isn't a problem with, it's not like all Australian beef is really poor quality. The EU allow countries to export anything that meets their standards, as any market does. What we're talking about is importing the stuff that's below those standards. We will get the shit that no one else will buy in. So we are going to provide for that market.
Gary's saying that won't happen, 66%. I mean, look, 91% of people who were asked if Brexit was going well said no or I don't know. 91%. I mean, I don't think it'll be a problem. In 10 years' time, I do not think it will be a problem getting a 66 majority. Because don't forget, in 1975, when we had a referendum to stay in the then EEC, because we joined it in 73, we had a referendum in 75, should we stay in this thing? It was a super majority. It was 65% said, yes, let's stay in it. And then cue 30, 40 years of whining from people going, oh, we were lied to. We just thought it was a political thing. And you go back to the newspaper articles at the time in periodicals like the Daily Frickin' Mail that say, this is just the beginning of a long journey towards closer political and social and military ties with our neighbors, our NATO neighbors. NATO members around Europe, and it's like, no, they made it very clear that was the intention.
That's right. Yeah,
it was only supposed to be.
I would still maybe knock it down a bit, maybe to 60%. I think all the EU want is to make sure that no one gets to say that it wasn't the will of the people. 60% is quite clear. You don't want to lose out by a percent on too high a target, because they do want. It is beneficial for everyone for the UK to be. And I know some businesses on the continent have benefited from the UK leaving. but by and large, trade is down in both directions.
Yeah. Well, Ireland's done really well out of Brexit. Phenomenally well. We've got all of our assets.
It's done well. I don't know. Not all of it is down to Brexit. Some of it is just down to the fact that they have emerged from the pandemic quite well.
Thank you to
Northern
Maggie
Ireland's
Pie.
done well.
Yes,
Northern Ireland has done well.
Maggie Pie, thank you very much for the 20 Swedish krona there. EU, keep friends close, but thick exes closer.
No, God, don't want to be anywhere near my ex.
Okay, so yeah, what we talk about Northern Ireland, yeah, best of both worlds. The enviable position, according to our Prime Minister, of being both in the single market and in the UK, like what we were before Brexit happened.
Except, Northern Ireland now is the only place in the world that has access to both those markets to export. There are trade frictions on importing from the British market, but not from the European market.
I just want to respond to Tim who says, I reckon Graham's right about a supermajority being required for rejoining. I'm not so confident about getting it in just 10 years. I have no idea, just guessing, but 10 years isn't a long time. It's not, but there was only 5 years between a poll done in 2011 saying that the EU was not in anyone's, like literally about less than 1% of people's top 3 priorities were our membership of the EU, to being the one and only thing that made us British was the fact that we didn't want to be part of the EU. That was 5 years between that poll and the actual fraud.
Yeah, the problem with that is that was a result of campaigning on the part of people who wanted us outside, and those people will still be there and still own the media.
Yeah.
Unless, of course, Labour can do a real number on media ownership rules.
Which they should do. But I mean, are you seeing, because I think when you talk about sort of Labour policy, about what possible things that Starmer and co will be doing once hopefully they're elected next year, you're thinking of terms, aren't you? So the first parliament, that's a late parliament, they'll do X, Y, Z. And then the stuff like PR, reform of the newspapers, even ever closer, integration with the EU, that's going to be 2029.
I think, well, what it is, although they all set out like this long-term plan, anything can change. For your manifesto lasts 1 term. That's all there is to it. It lasts 1 term, and even then, only if you win. So they can change all sorts of things in it due to changing circumstances for the next one. They're not, although yes, Labour are being very explicit about the no, nay, never on the single market customs union EU, it can easily change. And the thing is as well, they don't, like, U-turns are really bad. It's really bad in politics to U-turn. It makes you look like you don't know what you're doing. But if you're U-turning to a position the public approve of, it's not. It's fine.
That would be my response. That's why I keep saying this. It's like if I was a politician and I was asked a question that I didn't want to give a definitive answer on for political reasons, I would say that would be up for the people of the UK. We will do what they want us to do.
But they need to give a definitive answer. If they do not give a definitive answer, others will give it for them.
I very rarely hear a definitive answer from an MP. I've got to say, Phil. Well, the thing is, blah blah blah. They never say yes or no.
Fine. That's fine for a Tory MP, but a Labour MP will just be there, and they'll be accused of being evasive. Like Laura Kunsberg will say, "Why are you being evasive?" They'll all say that. Why they don't say it with Tory MPs?
No, they never say that with the Labour MPs.
They'll say it with the Labour MP. Why are you being evasive? Are you actually going to do this? You can't really say, "Well, we'll have to see." You can get away with it maybe in a small number of unimportant policy areas, but on the really important ones, you can't get away with it because they'll just fill in the blanks for themselves. I mean, look at what happened, when Keir Starmer said he wouldn't repeal the Public Order Act, but what he's trying to do is make sure that they know how he says he wants it to bed in, and then they'll decide what needs to be done to make sure people still have their rights to peaceful protest protected, because it could take the form, he said, of just police guidance. He said police guidance might deal with it. If not, then we might need to amend it or something like that. But as soon as people said that, it's like, oh, Labour support the Public Order Act now. Oh, Labour are fine with the idea of people not having access to public protest, even though they've said, no, we are going to protect people's rights to peaceful protest.
Yeah.
As soon as there's anything vague in there, and that is an issue where Labour have been vague, because instead of saying, they could have just said, we will seek to amend the legislation to remove all the offending articles in it whilst retaining the bits that are useful. They could have just said that.
Yeah.
And then when it came to the time, they could have said, actually, it seems that we just needed this police guidance and it's all sorted. Or they could just for show amend one little bit of it.
Yes.
But because of that vagueness, everyone, left and right are all going, oh, Starmers wants to take, he's happy to have taken away your right to peaceful protest. The same thing will happen with anything that you're vague on. Now, he gets away with that because the public sort of support the public order bill. He won't get away with it on something where the public's more divided, particularly where it's of interest to the target voters.
But I mean, that I didn't think that was particularly vague when he said we won't repeal it, because that was the headline, wasn't it?
Yeah, but people then took it. People took that to mean
vague, as in to say, we will look at it. We will definitely. That's one of the things we will look at when we are in power. We know there's a lot of public concern about this issue, and we've actually moved it up to the top of our agenda, and it's going to be one of the things that we definitely look at.
No, the top of their agenda, they've been quite clear about. The top of their agenda is repealing anti-strike laws and the employment rights bill.
Yeah, but I mean, I'm just talking about rhetoric. I'm just talking about the way Labour puts itself across. And we, me and you, we talk about how Labour doesn't really do very well on social media, but I don't think it does well on messaging in general, just communications with Labour. I always think, like when I'm watching a movie, I'm thinking there's a better way of doing this.
Yeah, well, I think very often the same as well. But in terms of general positions, it's hard to argue with the fact that Labour were in a position where it was basically impossible for them to win the next election. Now we expect them to win it with a very nice majority. In fact, we expect them to win the next two comfortably.
Well,
and that seemed
the
impossible.
Second one, I'm a bit. What concerns me is the economy over the next 5 years is going to be is going to be in trouble because of what the Tories have done, and I can't really see the Labour turning that ship around fast enough before the subsequent election, and the Tories just being able to go, oh look, we were out of power for a few years, and look what's happened to the economy, eh?
No, I think unless there is, and there could easily be, because unless there's a big external shock like a banking crisis, I can see them turning it around. Because the thing is, when your economy is knackered, it doesn't take much of improvement to get a big proportional benefit, like boost. It's harder when you're at the top. Like when you're at the top of anything in life, it's hard to maintain it. Like you could, for example, become the next manager of like Tottenham or something like that, and it would be quite hard. Be impossible for you because we don't know, neither of us know anything about coaching a football team, but even for someone good, it's quite hard to make the extra tiny improvements to really get a big boost. Whereas if you go and sort out a Sunday league team, you can make small improvements if you know what you're doing that will make them a much better team.
Yeah.
So the economy will be in such a shit state that I think Labour, because I mean, if Labour are, they are going to change the way they handle the economy. They're not just going to do it more competently. They're going to fundamentally change the way they approach the economy. So I think they absolutely will get some benefits. I worry that people will expect too much too quickly in terms of, like, for example, turning the NHS around, because I remember the NHS was in pretty bad state at the end of Major's time.
Yes.
And Labour was still fixing things 13 years later.
Yeah. And education.
And
and they never got around to transport. Labour really dropped the ball when it came to public transport in the 13 years they were in office. They did bugger all about the problems that were building and building up because they were too busy trying to sort out all the mistakes that the Tories had made.
Yeah. But nonetheless, it would. But there will be improvement, and there'll have to be improvements. Like Labour will be motivated to improve it because they're not going to get any favours in the media. So people will have to feel the improvements, not just be persuaded of them by the newspapers, because the newspapers won't bother to persuade people. They won't even attempt to.
I think Freckle Puny in the chat is agreeing with you there, saying the issue is not whether Labour can turn the oil tank around, it's whether people feel the benefits to a large degree and feel them quickly enough. And that's something just worldwide events. This is slightly in Labour's favour. Under the Tories, we've had not just Brexit, obviously, and Trump, but we've also had COVID and the invasion of Ukraine. We've seen oil prices go up through the roof. We've had, a litre of diesel go up to £1.99. Now it's back down to about £1.35. And that's happened despite what the Tories have done. So if Labour get in, and hopefully in the next year or so, then they'll be able to reap the rewards of that and go, well, when the Tories were in, your diesel was £2 a litre, and now it's not. Even though that's nothing to do with whatever Labour's planning to do.
Well, Labour had also talked about just getting rid of the VAT on energy bills as well, so they can straight away, as long as they can rebalance it elsewhere, chop 5% off.
Yeah, well, they're planning to do that, and then also charge private schools tax.
Yeah.
I don't believe in charity for millionaires.
No, not really.
Just one of those things. The IEA is a charity. I can't believe this. The IEA that gets to tell the Kwasi Kwarteng and Liz Truss to destroy our economy, costing us taxpayers £40 billion. And don't forget this new trade deal that we've got with with Australia is worth $10 billion. So it's worth a quarter of a Truss mini budget. Yeah. It's worth.
I bet it's not even that. I bet it's negative.
Just over a quarter of a failed track and trace app.
But this is the thing, whenever you looked at the economic impact assessments, they always talked about, in about 30 years, this will give us a 0% boost to GDP. Like, okay, great. We've just lost 4% from Brexit. And that's not in 30 years. In fact, at the moment, it's more than a 4% hit. 4% is where it's expected to be long term.
Yeah. There was someone on talking to Lewis Goodall yesterday and talking about, I think it was actually Lewis Goodall himself, talking about wealth taxes, looking more towards wealth taxes rather than income tax. Because obviously, if you're born into money, life's a little bit easier.
Yeah, but you need the reason why I would support wealth taxes, and bear in mind, and tax lawyers will say the same thing, wealth taxes are bloody hard to apply. Because part of the problem is, and in fact, Dan Needle actually made my own point. I've been making this point for months, but he made the point earlier this week. He put up a list of the 20 wealthiest people in the country, and it's like most of them have very tenuous links with the UK. They'll just they'll just cut their ties. The reason why, because when people work out, we could raise this from a wealth tax, they're basing it on what wealth is known about, but that's because they can openly admit their wealth because no one's going to tax it. Yeah. These billionaires hide their income, but not their wealth, because their wealth is not taxed. As soon as you start to tax it, they will hide that as well. And for a lot of them, it's really easy because they're not often UK citizens and they don't spend much time in the UK. And if they spend enough...
If people want to be involved in British society and want to live here, you were saying about what newspaper owners have to spend 8 months of the year in the UK, or you can't own a newspaper in this country. I mean, to me, that's the way you get around it, is say, look, if you don't want to be British anymore, that's fine, but we're going to take your passport off you. Thank you very much.
No, but that's fine.
Going to apply
because
for an Irish one. They're here. Technically, they can do that.
The reason they're here in the first place is because we charge very few taxes, so they will happily go somewhere else.
Yeah.
Okay. So what I'm saying is, yes, we can do without them, but they will actually disappear. We won't get anywhere near from wealth tax. But the reason why, despite the difficulty of applying it, I would still be in favor of it, is really because income tax has been so poorly applied that the wealth gap is now out of control. So you have to bring it back in. But ultimately, for the long term, income tax is the right way to deal with it. This is not me arguing.
I mean, sorry to interrupt, but like income tax at the moment, it's a wage tax. So if you are a billionaire and you go to your mate and you say, can you lend me £800,000, please? You get £800,000 tax free. And then you can use your earnings or what, in your company to pay off that loan a year later. And because it was a loan, you don't pay any tax on it, on that £800,000.
But that's where it's wrong. But you can still change that.
Yeah, that's what I would do.
You can still deal with that. And but the just because they feel you just need to remove tax avoidance schemes.
Yes, but also Amazon are not going to go pack up and move somewhere else. They're not an individual.
No.
They need to have the trade here, but
Exactly.
them and Starbucks and McDonald's and
Yeah,
Coca-Cola,
as long as they're making a
as little
profit
as
here,
possible.
they will stay here. No one turns down a profit.
So if you're making money in our
Yeah.
country, you've got to pay tax on it. End of.
Yeah.
And on this, oh no, we're actually making a loss if you think about it very hard. Just a shout out to Andre there, who's put £2 super chat in and wants to ask a question. Phil, what are your thoughts on the national AI strategy?
We haven't got one. We haven't got one. Rishi Sunak is being urged to adopt one.
Yeah.
But what has been urged of Rishi Sunak is what he should do is gather together all the political leaders to work on a cross-party response, particularly as there is, let's be honest, going to be a new government next year. It is a serious problem. Everyone accepts it's a serious problem, or at least a threat. So we should do that, and he should get people together.
But
he's not doing.
No.
He's not doing.
They're not big on details.
The Tories are probably still trying to work out if it's really a threat to them. That's probably what's going on.
Yeah. And it is. I mean, it should be. It should be a threat to them. It should be. I mean, it should be a threat to sort of potentially to anything. But the fact that a lot of the AI pioneers are crying out for regulation to make sure that it goes in a good direction rather than a bad direction, because the power of it eventually would come this far, this fast. I think it's been a bit of a shock to the system for a lot of people working in computers that it has been a lot easier than they thought it was going to be to replicate intelligence.
Yeah, but you can see where Tories are going with this. Some of them will be thinking, well, hang on a minute, we let this go ahead, we can get an awful lot of cheap robots who will not complain about like their wages or conditions, without thinking that what you're going to do with the rest of society. Then do you think they're just going to sit at home in poverty? But they don't think that far ahead. They just think, hang on a minute, maybe we can use AI to sack a load of workers.
Yeah.
So they're still trying to work out if it's worth opposing like unregulated AI development yet.
We got Spencer dropped five Australian dollars into the chat. Or it might be Austrian dollars. No, it would be Australian, wouldn't it? Austrian euros, Austrian shillings. Austrian Gen Y, now the biggest voting bloc, which screwed the Tories. They lost a by-election as opposition for the first time in a century. Manned voting, full thumbs up. That's from Spencer. I don't know if you're referring to my ex-Aussie girlfriend, Mandy. There, I used to call her Mandy. Thanks for voting on that one, Mandy.
Yeah, I don't think we can bring in mandatory voting. I would like to, but I think there'd be a lot of opposition to it.
I think that a lot of people think that in the UK, if we had mandatory voting, then people would vote the way they want them to vote. Like you sometimes see those pie charts where it says only a third voted for Labour, a third voted for the Tories. This extra third needs to vote to stop things happening. But we see in Australia, the last 100 years has been majority right-wing governments, been liberal governments. And that's because, the people who are forced to vote under mandatory voting just tend to vote pretty much the same way as the people who do bother voting, because I guess with a lot less information, I would say.
Yeah. But there we go. I just think it'll be difficult. I just don't think I don't see anyone getting behind it. In fact, I don't actually know of any campaigns behind it at all in the UK. And I think it's just because people realize it's not really going to happen.
I'm not.
I mean, PR is the big.
PR for me is the pinnacle. It's like
we don't even have a campaign for it. We don't actually have a campaign group, pushing it.
Yeah,
got nothing.
Yeah, well, I mean, just look at Australia. If it worked, Australia just kept on pumping out left-wing governments, I'd be like, yeah, okay, fair enough. That's something we should consider, but it doesn't. I
also don't know what's the difference, though, in attitudes, like social and economic attitudes between Australia and the UK.
It's quite similar.
Is it?
A lot of casual racism in Australia. Bless them. A bit too much for my liking. But yeah, you have the same rhetoric, very, very similar rhetoric about immigrants being the worst thing ever in all the world ever, and we can't live because all these immigrants coming here, which is a bit rich. There was a famous cartoon about 15 years ago in one of the Australian newspapers, and it was these Australians on the beach with placards, saying, "Boat people go home," and "Immigrants not wanted," and "Australia's full." And then there's two Aboriginals standing behind them, going, "God, I wish we thought of that."
Yeah. Yeah. Well, there's a similar thing. There's a similar cartoon for the United States, where an American Indian saying, "Oh, you think all immigrants should go home? Lovely. When will you be leaving?"
Exactly. But yeah, that's one of the crazier and more frustrating things about the last few years is the way that the idea of migration, the idea of moving to another country, has been seen as something that is bad, that you shouldn't do, that only bad people do that, and you're bringing something awful when you go to another country, when actually these places have brought amazing culture to Britain and other places around the world. Really good food, much better food than we had before people started coming here from Asia and Africa and the Caribbean. But it's I would say the Australian sort of political makeup is very similar to the UK in that you have that same sort of rhetoric from the politicians. You have a left-right split. You have the Labour Party, although the Labour Party in Australia have just brought in, someone said this in the chat, brought in quite draconian anti-protest rules. I think they were brought in South Australia under the Labour government, Labour without the U for some reason, and the Liberals, who are the Tories over there. Like I say, they've dominated the power in Australia a lot more than the other side have. In the UK, I think it's 1/3. Been in the last 100 years, 1/3 Labour, 2/3 Tory.
I suppose we've both had Murdoch monkeying about, haven't we?
Oh, they're a lot more straight up about Murdoch's damage that he's been doing in Australia. They're a lot more straight talking about that. We don't really have that conversation as much in the UK to the same extent. There was Kevin Thingy, who was the ex-Prime Minister of Australia, and he's done a few talks. Kevin Rudd, yeah. He's really torn Murdoch a new one, and got a lot of people on side to sort of get this menace out of Australia. And I got into trouble on one of my chats the other week because I said that he was an Aussie, and they went, "He's not an Australian, he's an American now. We don't want anything to do with him. He's not welcome here." So, he's born there. So,
yeah. I mean, I could say the same thing about Jeremy Clarkson, but despite what I say, and the fact he lives in Oxfordshire, he did come from Doncaster.
True. Leonard's Way says, "Yes, I'm South Australia. We were mostly German." Well, there you go. Because Australia don't want to waste time writing "silent us." I don't really understand that. And Skylar says, "If millionaires leave the country, they can't take their assets with them." Be quite interesting. You've got to leave your assets in a British bank account, which then gets moved to Dublin when we leave the EU.
Yeah. That's where Rees-Mogg went, isn't it?
Yeah.
Brexit will be wonderful. I'm just going to put all my money in Dublin. I thought you said Brexit was going to be marvelous. Oh, I'm sure it's just a precaution, you see.
Just a precaution. Bastards. Anyway, okay, well, we'll wrap it up there because we're way over time. It's actually 9 minutes past 2. I don't know if we were a bit late getting started. I don't think we were, but with that was good. That was good little roundup of what's been going on this week, the madness. And are you doing a live show over the weekend or?
Yes, I do on Saturday evenings.
Okay, well, we should look out for that, and I'll be back on Monday morning at 9:30 for Morning Brew. In the meantime, we did a podcast together, and I still haven't put it online, so I'll try and get that up. I'll try and get that up next week, this weekend, and I'm having a chat with George Ravel, who was one of the people who spoke to us when we were doing the Three Blokes in the Pub podcast, and he is a constitutional lawyer, and we'll be talking about this whole back and forth between the government, the Cabinet Office, and the COVID inquiry, and Boris Johnson, and getting a legal slant on that. So look out for that this week.
And actually, on the court papers, they've listed Boris Johnson as an interested party, but also one of Carrie Johnson's friends, who was working as an aide at the time.
Yeah.
But as someone pointed out, it doesn't actually say on the papers on whose side they're representing.
My God.
whether they're on the side of the they're just listed as an interested party, but it doesn't say whether they're on the side of the government or on the side of the inquiry. Although Boris Johnson seems to be giving the impression he's on the side of the inquiry, but in reality, Boris Johnson is on Boris Johnson's side.
Yeah, always. All right. Well, thank you, Phil. Thanks to everyone watching. Thanks for the super chats. Thanks for all the comments. Thanks to all the YouTube members and the patrons out there supporting Labour Social. And we'll see you very soon. And until then, I'll say hello, good evening, welcome, and goodbye.
See you later.